A boy vanished in seconds and was never seen again. Not in a city, not in a back alley where danger hides in plain sight. He vanished in a national park, surrounded by his own family, in broad daylight, on a holiday built for fathers and sons. One moment he was laughing, ducking behind a wall of green leaves to play a simple game of hide and seek. The next moment, he was gone. Not lost, not delayed, gone. As if the mountain itself had reached out and swallowed him whole. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains. Soldiers, trackers, bloodhounds, helicopters cutting through fog above ridgelines that had stood untouched for 10,000 years. Over 1,000 people walked those slopes, calling a 6-year-old's name into the dark. And the mountain gave them nothing back. No shoe, no scrap of red fabric, no bone.
The Martins were a Knoxville family, and like a lot of families in East Tennessee, the mountains were not a vacation. They were a ritual. Every Father's Day weekend, Bill Martin packed up his sons and headed into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, 500,000 acres of ancient ridgeline straddling the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. It was the kind of trip fathers planned for years before their sons are even born. A rite of passage, boots on dirt, wood smoke in the hair, a chance to teach a boy how to read a trail map and build a fire that wouldn't die out by morning. In June of 1969, Bill brought along his father, Clyde Martin, and his older son, 9-year-old Douglas. And for the first time, he brought his youngest boy, too. Dennis Lloyd Martin was 6 years old. In 6 days, he would turn 7. He was small for his age, dark-haired, dark-eyed, with the kind of quiet curiosity that made him easy to overlook in a crowd and impossible to forget once you'd spent 5 minutes with him. This was his first overnight camping trip. His first time sleeping under canvas instead of a roof. His first real taste of the wilderness his father loved.
He wore a bright red t-shirt that day. His mother, Violet, had dressed him in green shorts and a pair of Oxford-style shoes. Nobody thought twice about the outfit. Nobody could have known that the color of a 6-year-old's shirt would become one of the most haunting details in American search and rescue history. The group set out from Cades Cove, one of the most scenic and heavily trafficked corners of the park, and began climbing. They spent their first night at Russell Field, a grassy clearing folded into the high country, the kind of place where the wind moves through like it's looking for something. The next morning, June 14th, they pushed on towards Spence Field, a wide, open meadow nearly 5,000 feet up, sitting almost directly on the Appalachian Trail. It is remote. It is beautiful. And in 1969, it was a long, long way from help. Along the way, the Martins crossed paths with another family making the same trek, and the two groups decided to camp together for the night. It was Father's Day weekend. The mood was easy. The kids fell in together the way kids do, instantly, without introduction, like they'd known each other for years. By mid-afternoon, 4 boys were standing in the tall grass of Spence Field, plotting something every child in America has plotted 1,000 times before. They wanted to scare the grown-ups. The plan was simple. Douglas Martin and 2 boys from the other family would circle around through the trees and come up behind the adults on the trail. Dennis would take a separate route and meet them there, and together they'd jump out screaming and laughing, and the adults would jump back, and everyone would have a good story for the campfire that night. There was just one problem. Dennis was wearing a red shirt. In a field of green and brown, red doesn't hide. The other boys could already picture it. They'd be perfectly concealed in the brush, and Dennis would come crashing through like a flag on fire, ruining the surprise before it even started. So the boys made a decision that, in hindsight, carries the full weight of tragedy. They told Dennis to take a wider path, go around, stay out of sight a little longer than the rest of them. It was a small, harmless piece of childhood logic.
The kind of plan that gets made and forgotten in seconds. Except this time, it wasn't forgotten. This time, it became the last thing his brother and his friends ever decided for him. Bill Martin watched his youngest son turn and walk into the tree line. He has said many times since that there was nothing unusual about the moment, nothing that made him uneasy. Dennis ducked behind a patch of bushes just off the trail, heading northwest, away from where the other boys had gone. His father watched him disappear into the green and thought nothing more of it. Why would he? It was a game. The woods around them weren't some far-flung wilderness. They were familiar, walked over 1,000 times by hikers just like them. Dennis would be back in minutes.
The other three boys circled through the brush and burst out onto the trail, laughing, ready to startle the adults. Dennis never came. At first, nobody panicked. 3 minutes passed, then 4, then 5. Children wander. Children get distracted by a beetle on a leaf or a strange-shaped rock and lose track of time. But 5 minutes stretched into something else entirely, and Bill Martin felt the first cold pull of fear in his stomach. He began calling his son's name into the trees. No answer. He walked the Appalachian Trail westward for almost a mile, scanning the brush, raising his voice louder with every step. Certain, almost certain, that Dennis had simply doubled back toward camp. He hadn't. By the time Bill Martin returned to Spence Field, his son had been gone for the better part of an hour, and the woods had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. What happened next would become the largest search operation in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and it began with a race against the one thing no search team can outrun: the weather. Clyde Martin set off on foot to reach a ranger station and report his grandson missing. Word reached the National Park Service that evening, and by 5 the next morning, rangers had assembled a search crew of 30 people at Spence Field. Within hours, that number swelled past 200. By the time the search reached its peak, more than 1,400 people would comb the mountainside. Park rangers, Tennessee National Guardsmen, Green Beret soldiers flown in from Fort Bragg, Boy Scout troops, off-duty firefighters, college students, local volunteers who simply couldn't stay home once they heard a 6-year-old boy was missing on the mountain. 2 military helicopters were dispatched from an Air Force base in Georgia. It was, without exaggeration, one of the largest civilian search efforts the American wilderness had ever seen.
And it was already too late. On the night Dennis disappeared, a thunderstorm rolled over the ridgeline. In a matter of hours, nearly 3 inches of rain fell across Spence Field and the surrounding terrain. The temperature dropped to near 50 degrees. Streams that had been calm and shallow swelled into churning brown torrents. Trails washed out. And any scent trail, any footprint, any fragile thread of evidence Dennis might have left behind in those first critical minutes was erased by the mountain itself before a single search dog ever got the chance to follow it. This single detail would haunt investigators for decades. Search dogs are most effective in the first hours after a disappearance, while a scent trail is still fresh and undisturbed. But because the storm hit almost immediately, rangers made the call not to deploy tracking dogs right away, reasoning the trail was already gone. It was, in hindsight, the wrong call. If Dennis had still been moving after the rain passed, he would have been laying down a brand new scent trail, one the dogs never got the chance to find, because by the time they were brought in, days had already slipped by.
The terrain itself became its own kind of enemy. Spence Field sits on a stretch of ridge where the land drops away into the deep, snarled ravines that drain north into Tennessee and south into North Carolina. Steep, densely forested, choked with rhododendron thickets so thick a grown man could pass 3 feet from a hiding child and never see him. It is country where copperhead snakes coil under leaf litter, where black bears move silently between hollows, where feral hogs root through the undergrowth, and where a 6-year-old boy, alone and frightened, would have had almost no way to make himself seen, even if he had been standing in plain sight. For days,
The search teams pushed deeper and wider. They cut through 50, then 56 square miles of some of the most unforgiving wilderness in the eastern United States. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning a canopy so dense that a search from the air could miss a body lying just beneath the leaves. On the ground, men roped themselves together to cross flooded creek beds. Searchers called Dennis's name until their voices gave out, slept in shifts, and rose again before dawn to do it all over again. And then, just when hope seemed to be slipping away entirely, the mountain offered one single maddening clue.
A set of small, child-sized footprints was discovered near a stream bed. The tracks showed an unmistakable pattern, one barefoot and one foot still wearing a shoe, an Oxford or tennis-style sole, exactly the kind Dennis had been wearing the day he vanished. A retired park ranger who took part in the search, a man named Dwight McCarter, would later say he believed those prints almost certainly belonged to Dennis. They weren't part of a group. No Boy Scout troop combing the area that day had been hiking barefoot. But the prints led to the edge of the stream, and there, they simply stopped. No drag marks, no sign of a struggle, no indication of where a barefoot, frightened 6-year-old boy had gone after stepping into that water. The trail that had taken searchers a full week to find ended exactly where the mystery began, at the edge of moving water, swallowed by the same mountain that had taken everything else.
By June 26th, the bulk of the search began to scale back. On June 29th, after more than 2 weeks, the major operation was called off. A smaller, quieter search by park staff would continue for months, finally closing for good in September of 1969. Dennis Martin's father offered a $5,000 reward for any information, a fortune at the time, and it changed nothing. The largest search in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park had produced, in the end, almost nothing at all. What makes the disappearance of Dennis Martin so deeply unsettling isn't just that he vanished. It's that every single explanation anyone has ever offered comes apart the moment you look at it too closely. The first theory is the simplest, and the one investigators favored most. A small, disoriented child wanders deeper into unfamiliar terrain, becomes lost, and succumbs to the elements. Hypothermia, exhaustion, a fall into one of the ravines that scar that section of ridge. It's the explanation that requires no conspiracy, no villain, nothing but bad luck and brutal terrain. And it is entirely plausible. A 6-year-old boy, panicked and alone after dark, with temperatures dropping into the 40s and rain turning the ground to mud, would have been fighting for his life within hours. The problem is the search itself. 1,400 people, 56 square miles, search dogs, helicopters, Green Berets trained to find exactly this kind of target in exactly this kind of terrain, and not one confirmed trace. No remains have ever surfaced, not that summer, not in the decades since, despite hikers walking those same trails every single day for over 50 years. The second theory is the one the wilderness itself seems to whisper: a wild animal attack. Black bears, bobcats, even the area's population of venomous snakes have all been raised as possibilities. It would explain the total absence of remains. Animals do not leave behind tidy evidence. But investigators who studied the case point to something crucial. There was no scene. No blood, no torn clothing, no scattering of disturbed earth. Nothing that resembles the aftermath of a predator encounter, even days after a thorough search. It remains a haunting possibility. It has never been a confirmed one. The third theory is the one that refuses to die, the one whispered around campfires for half a century, and the one Dennis's own father came to believe most strongly: abduction. That same afternoon, roughly an hour after Dennis vanished, and several miles away, a tourist named Harold Key and his family reported hearing something that still raises the hair on the back of the neck of anyone who hears it described: an enormous, sickening scream tearing through the woods. Moments later, they say they saw a man emerge from the trees. Unkempt, shaggy, rough-looking, moving with purpose along the trail. And according to Key, the man was carrying a bundle of cloth over his shoulder. Cloth that, by his account, was red. It is the kind of detail that sounds almost too perfect to be coincidence, and almost too convenient to be entirely trusted. The location of the sighting was several miles from Spence Field, far enough that investigators, and eventually the FBI, concluded it would have been extraordinarily difficult for anyone to cover that distance through dense, vertical terrain in the time available. The FBI examined the Martin family for any connection to the case, any enemy, any motive, anyone with a reason to take a 6-year-old boy from his father. They found nothing. No evidence of a kidnapping ever surfaced, then or in the 50-plus years since. And yet the shaggy man on the ridge and the scream that came before him have never been explained either. He was simply seen and never identified and never seen again.
The fourth theory isn't really a theory at all. It's the admission that nothing fits, that some combination of circumstances, a flash flood, a fall into water, a body carried by current into terrain too remote to ever search, conspired to erase a 6-year-old boy so completely that not even the most extensive search in the park's history could find a trace. It is the theory of last resort, reached for only when accident, animal, and abduction all fail to account for the silence that followed.
In the chronological case file later compiled by the National Park Service, one detail stands out with quiet, devastating clarity. The park superintendent wrote that if Dennis Martin were ever found, he believed it would be within a few miles of where he vanished. He has never been found. The case fundamentally changed how America conducts wilderness search and rescue. Before Dennis Martin, there was no standardized national protocol for finding a lost person in dense terrain. Rangers simply went out and searched as best they could. After Dennis Martin, search and rescue became a discipline, a science. Investigators began studying what they call lost person behavior, mapping the likely paths a missing person takes based on age, mental state, and terrain. A direct, painful legacy of the chaos that unfolded across those 56 square miles in the summer of 1969.
In 2022, after decades of FOIA requests, the FBI finally released its complete file on the case, over 100 pages, confirming what investigators had quietly believed for years. There was no evidence, anywhere, of foul play. And there was no evidence of anything else either. Just absence. Complete, documented, official absence. Dennis Lloyd Martin would be in his early 60s today. His case remains open, technically classified by the National Park Service as inactive, but never closed. Somewhere in the official record, his name still appears on a list of missing persons, frozen at age 6, 6 days shy of 7, last seen wearing a red shirt and stepping behind a bush to win a game. More than 50 years of hikers have walked those same ridgelines. More than 50 years of rain have fallen across Spence Field and Russell Field and the dense ravines that swallow sound and light in equal measure. The trails have shifted. The forest has grown and changed and grown again. And still, nothing has surfaced. Not a shoe, not a button, not a single confirmed trace of the boy who vanished in the time it takes to count to 100. Maybe the mountain took him quickly, mercifully, in a fall or a flood he never even understood was happening. Maybe a stranger really did walk out of those woods carrying something red over his shoulder. And maybe that stranger is still out there somewhere, an old man now, carrying a secret instead. Or maybe the truth is simpler and far more unbearable, that some places are vast enough and wild enough and old enough to take a person and give nothing back. No answer, no body, no closure. Just a name on a missing persons list.
and a family that spent the rest of their lives listening for a voice that never called back. 1,400 searchers, 56 square miles, helicopters, soldiers, bloodhounds, and a $5,000 reward. And in the end, the Great Smoky Mountains kept their secret. Dennis Martin disappeared in seconds.